A boy gives a homeless man a sandwich, and days later the police show up at his house. The wind blew gently that spring afternoon in Amsterdam, and the park resembled a living painting. Children raced along the paths, while adults chatted on benches shaded by the trees. 10-year-old Lars walked beside his mother, Sophie, clutching a small paper bag that held his lunch, a cheese sandwich and a bottle of water. His steps slowed as something caught his attention. Near a sturdy oak tree, a man sat on the ground. His hair was disheveled, and his clothes were worn. He looked lost, his eyes fixed on the ground. Lars tugged on Sophie's sleeve, pointing at the man. "Who's that, Mum? Why's he sitting there all alone?" Sophie cast a brief glance in his direction, and uneasy, quickened her pace. "Come on, Lars, it's better not to get too close." But Lars couldn't look away. Something about the man moved him, a quiet sadness that seemed invisible to everyone else. He hesitated, watching as people hurried past, pretending not to see the man or shooting him suspicious glances. Why doesn't anyone do anything, he thought. Suddenly, Lars slipped free from his mother's grasp and approached the man. "Hi, sir. Are you hungry?" he asked, holding out the paper bag. The man raised his eyes, startled. His voice came out rough, barely more than a whisper. "Thank you, lad. That's very kind of you." Sophie rushed over to Lars, her face visibly worried. "Lars, what are you doing?" "He just needs help, Mum," Lars replied, with the simplicity of someone who saw no danger, only need. The man opened the bag, pulling out the sandwich with trembling hands. He took a small bite and smiled faintly at Lars. "My name's Willem. Thank you so much." Before Sophie could respond, Lars asked, "What happened to you?" Willem hesitated, but his sad eyes spoke louder than his words. "It's a long story, lad." Sophie gently took Lars by the arm, murmuring that it was time to leave. Willem waved from afar, his expression grateful but tinged with mystery. As they walked home, Lars appeared deep in thought. "Mum, why do people ignore him?" Sophie sighed, searching for the right words. "Lars, it's complicated. It's not always safe to help strangers. You never know what could happen." Lars frowned, but he didn't seem dangerous. He seemed sad. Sophie didn't answer, but the worry in her eyes was clear. For the rest of the walk, Lars was unusually quiet. His thoughts kept circling back to Willem, wondering who he was and what might have happened to leave him in such a state. When they arrived home, Lars recounted the encounter to his father, Peter, who responded much like Sophie. "It's kind of you to help, son, but we must be careful. Not everyone has good intentions." Lars insisted, "But he wasn't bad, Dad. He said thank you." He seemed lonely. The conversation hung in the air, unresolved. The image of the man in the park, fragile and forgotten, lingered in Lars's mind. Later that evening, as he gazed out of his bedroom window, Lars couldn't stop wondering if Willem was all right. The question echoed in his mind, louder with each passing moment, as if it carried the weight of something yet to unfold. Sophie's unease was evident from the moment she and Lars returned home. As she put away the groceries, she couldn't shake the image of the scene in the park. The sight of Lars handing the sandwich to the stranger troubled her more than she cared to admit. At dinner, she finally addressed the issue more firmly. "Lars, you know it's not safe to talk to strangers, don't you?" Lars, fiddling with his cutlery, looked up at his mother. "But he wasn't bad, Mum. He was just sad and hungry." Sophie took a deep breath, trying to keep calm. "That might be true, my love, but you don't know anything about him. He could have done something dangerous." "Like what?" Lars challenged with the disarming sincerity only a child could muster. "He just said thank you." Sophie exchanged a glance with Peter, who had been listening in silence. After a moment, she replied, "Lars, some people end up in situations like that because of serious problems. Sometimes it's their fault, sometimes it's not. But that doesn't change the fact that we need to be careful." Lars fell quiet, though his expression showed he wasn't convinced. After a moment he asked, "And if it were you or Dad on that bench, would someone help you?" Sophie's chest tightened at his question. Before she could answer, Peter stepped in, subtly steering the conversation in a different direction. "What you did was kind. Lars, but your mum's right about one thing. We have to be cautious. Do you understand? Lars nodded slowly, but his face revealed that the issue still troubled him. That evening, as Sophie washed the dishes, she spoke to Peter. He's so sensitive, always worrying about others, even when he doesn't understand the risks. Peter sighed. He's got a good heart, Sophie. I think we need to teach him how to balance that with caution, but without dimming his empathy. Sophie nodded in agreement, though her heart remained heavy. Across the house, Lars lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. He couldn't stop thinking about Willem. Who was he? Why didn't anyone seem to want to help him? The man's tired face and grateful eyes kept returning to Lars's mind, like a puzzle he felt compelled to solve. In the days that followed, Lars's concern only grew. He asked his mother several times if they could return to the park, but the answer was always no. The tension in the household reached a new peak when 3 days later, something unexpected happened. A police car pulled up in front of the house. Sophie, startled, answered the door to find a policewoman with a serious but friendly demeanor. "Good afternoon. I'm Officer Maike. May I speak with you?" Lars's heart pounded as he listened from the hallway. Could this be about Willem? Officer Maike stepped into the living room with firm yet measured strides, her expression warm, aiming to ease the tension. Sophie offered her a chair, still visibly unsettled by the unexpected visit. From the hallway, Lars peeked curiously, his heart racing. He was almost certain the officer's presence had something to do with Willem. Good afternoon. We're conducting an investigation in the neighborhood regarding a man recently seen in the local park," Maike began, consulting a small notebook. "Some residents have reported unusual behavior, and as a precaution, we're looking into the situation further." Sophie, visibly concerned, furrowed her brow. "What sort of unusual behavior?" "He seems disoriented, sometimes talking to himself, and has been spotted wandering through different parts of the city. There's no indication of aggression, but we're making inquiries to ensure everything is under control," Maike explained in a professional tone. Before Sophie could respond, Lars appeared in the doorway, unable to hold back. "It's Willem, isn't it?" he asked directly. Maike turned to him, surprised and intrigued. "Willem? Do you know him?" Before Sophie could interject, Lars began recounting the events at the park. "I gave him a sandwich. He was hungry and looked sad. He didn't do anything wrong." Maike crouched slightly to meet Lars at eye level, her voice kind but focused. "That was very kind of you, Lars. Can you tell me more about him? What did he look like?" Lars described Willem in detail. The worn clothes, the tired eyes, and the polite way he had thanked him. Maike listened attentively, jotting down each observation as Lars spoke. When he finished, she nodded slowly, as if piecing together parts of a puzzle. "Lars, you've been very helpful. Sometimes all people need is a little compassion." Though Maike's words were comforting, Sophie's worry was evident. "Officer Maike, do you think this man is dangerous? My son is just a child." The officer paused, weighing her response. "From what we know so far, he doesn't appear to be a threat, but he does seem to be in a vulnerable state, possibly struggling with health issues or mental confusion. We're trying to ensure he gets the support he needs." As Maike prepared to leave, she added casually, "We're speaking to neighbors in the area. Any detail about him, even something small, could be helpful. Some people mentioned seeing him in the park talking to himself, but we're hoping to gather more consistent information." Lars listened intently, picturing Willem wandering the streets alone, with no one to help him. "Oh, and by the way," Maike said, turning back to Lars with a small smile, "your description was very detailed. That will help us a lot. We'll take care of him, I promise." That night, as Maike continued knocking on doors around the neighborhood, Lars went to bed with a whirlwind of thoughts. He wanted to believe Willem would be in good hands, but deep down he felt the story was far from over. He worried no one would understand Willem the way he had. Meanwhile, back at the station, Maike reviewed the neighbors' reports. Most described Willem as confused and distant, but a few provided more intriguing details. One woman claimed to have overheard him murmuring names that sounded significant: Emma and drawings. Maike paused, jotting down the new lead. It could be a small clue, but it might hold the key to understanding Willem's story. The next morning carried a sense of anticipation. Lars woke up with a mix of restlessness and hope, wondering if Officer Maike had discovered anything about Willem. As he ate breakfast, he overheard his parents speaking in hushed tones in the kitchen, trying not to let him hear. "I don't understand why the police are so involved in this. He seems like just another homeless man," Peter said between sips of coffee. Sophie shook her head. Maike mentioned he might be disoriented due to a health issue. This could be more serious than we think. Curious and unable to contain his thoughts, Lars decided to step out into the garden to distract himself. It was then that he heard the familiar sound of footsteps at the gate. It was Maike, this time out of uniform, holding a notebook and wearing a determined expression. "Good morning. May I speak with you again? We've discovered something important." Lars's parents invited her inside, and Maike seemed excited, as though she had uncovered a vital piece of the puzzle. "We've identified the man you referred to as Willem," she began, glancing at Lars. "His full name is Willem de Jong. He's an architect and has been missing for the past several months." The revelation stunned everyone, but Lars was the first to speak. "He wasn't living on the streets all this time, was he?" "Not exactly," Maike said, her tone a mix of admiration and caution as she addressed him. "We've learned that Willem has encephalitis, a medical condition that can cause confusion and memory loss. He disappeared without a trace about 4 months ago, and his family has been desperately searching for him." Sophie covered her mouth in shock. "My goodness, so he didn't even know who he was?" "Exactly," Maike confirmed. "It seems that over time, he became increasingly lost and disoriented. The good news is that, thanks to Lars's detailed description, we were able to locate him at a medical clinic last night." Lars felt his heart race with a mix of relief and pride. He had helped find Willem. "Is he going to be okay now?" Lars asked, the anxiety in his voice revealing his hope for a happy ending. "He's been taken to the hospital for treatment. It's too early to say for sure, but he's safe now and receiving care," Maike replied, with an encouraging smile. Their conversation was interrupted by the ringing of Maike's phone. She stepped aside to answer, listening intently to the voice on the other end. "That's interesting. Yes, I'll look into it." "Yes. Now, thank you." As she hung up, Maike turned back to the family with a curious expression. "It seems Willem has begun recovering fragments of his memory. He's repeatedly mentioned a name, Emma. It's the name of his wife. We're already trying to contact her." A wave of relief and joy washed over Lars. Willem had someone who cared about him, someone who might be able to bring him back to his normal life. Before leaving, Maike knelt down to face Lars directly. "You made a difference, Lars. Because of your kindness, we were able to save a life. Never underestimate the power of compassion." Lars smiled. But deep down, he knew this wasn't the end. He imagined Willem's reunion with his wife and wondered if they might someday thank him for his small yet pivotal act. As Maike left, Sophie placed a hand on Lars's shoulder. "I didn't fully understand at first, but now I see how much you helped, my love. I'm so proud of you." Lars smiled shyly, but his thoughts had already drifted, envisioning what might come next in Willem's life. The phone rang early in the morning at the police station, and Maike answered with anticipation. On the other end, a tearful voice confirmed what she had hoped. Willem de Jong had been identified by his wife, Emma, who was on her way to the hospital. Hours later, Emma arrived at the clinic, carrying a folder full of documents and old photographs. Her face showed a mix of relief and nervousness. As she entered the room, Willem looked at her with confusion. But something in his expression shifted. Though his memory was incomplete, her presence seemed to stir something deep within him. "Willem, it's me, Emma," she said softly, taking his hand. Slowly, Willem began to murmur, "Emma, I remember. You, the projects, the drawings." His words were fragmented, but Emma knew in that moment that he was starting to come back to himself. Tears streamed down her face as she squeezed his hand tighter. Later, as Willem regained clarity, Emma learned how he had been found. Mikey explained that it all started with a boy named Lars, whose simple act of kindness in the park had set everything in motion. Emma's curiosity was piqued. "I need to meet this family. I need to thank Lars personally," she said firmly. In the following days, as Willem continued to recover, Emma arranged a visit to Lars's home. With Mikey's help, the meeting was set up. When the day arrived, Emma showed up at the door with a warm smile and a beautifully wrapped gift in her hands. Sophie answered, surprised by Emma's elegant and gracious demeanor. "I'm Emma de Jong," she began. "I'm Willem's wife, the man your son helped." For a moment, Sophie was speechless. Lars appeared behind her, curious. As soon as he saw Emma, he remembered Mikey mentioning her name. "You're Emma? Is Willem okay?" Lars asked eagerly. Emma crouched to his level, her eyes glistening with gratitude. "Willem is getting better thanks to you. I want you to know how grateful we are for what you did for him." She took Lars's hands in hers, visibly emotional. "I don't know how to thank you enough." Lars smiled shyly, but Sophie interjected, "He's just a child. He only did what he thought was right." Emma shook her head gently. "Sometimes it's children who remind us what's truly right," she said, turning back to Lars. "Your kindness saved a life and gave us a second chance as a family." The conversation continued, and Emma, who owned a chain of stores in the city, asked about Lars's family. When she learned that Sophie was looking for something more stable and that Peter worked on temporary projects, Emma made an unexpected offer. "Sophie, I'd love to have someone with your energy managing one of my shops, and if Peter is interested, I can connect him with a sustainable design company. Willem worked there before his illness, and they're always looking for talented professionals." Sophie was stunned, struggling to find the right words. "That's incredibly generous," she said at last. "I don't know how to thank you." Emma smiled warmly. "Think of it as the beginning of a friendship." The visit ended with a promise to bring their families closer together. As Emma left, Sophie looked at Lars with a mix of pride and amazement. "Your kind heart brought something incredible to our family, Lars," she said. Lars didn't know what to say. Deep down, he was happy for Willem, but also curious about what would come next. He had a feeling that the changes were only just beginning. The months that followed brought profound changes to everyone involved. Willem, still in recovery, began rediscovering his identity. With Emma's support and the help of his doctors, he regained critical memories and gradually started talking about the architectural projects that once fueled his passion before encephalitis struck. His eyes sparkled again, especially when he spoke of Lars, the boy who had unknowingly given him a second chance at life. For Lars's family, Emma's assistance was life-changing. Sophie, who accepted Emma's offer to manage one of her stores, quickly found the environment welcoming and flexible. The job allowed her to spend more time with Lars while providing the stability and confidence she hadn't felt in years. Peter, initially skeptical about the recommendation to join the sustainable design company, soon fell in love with his new work. He thrived in developing innovative environmental solutions, such as buildings made from recyclable materials. Within weeks of joining, Peter was promoted, impressing his supervisors with his dedication and creative ideas. Their lives seemed to bloom, all because of Lars's simple gesture. Yet the boy didn't boast about what he had done. Instead, he approached the changes with the curiosity of someone beginning to understand the world's complexities. One Saturday morning, Emma and Willem arrived unexpectedly at their home. Willem, looking healthier and wearing new clothes, held a bag full of gifts. When Lars opened the door, he couldn't hide his surprise. "Willem!" he exclaimed, a bit too loudly. Willem laughed, a light, sincere sound that felt new, even to him. "Hello, Lars. I finally get to thank you in person for everything you did for me." Lars blushed, unsure of what to say, but Willem continued, "If it weren't for you, I might not be here today. You saw something in me that no one else did, and it changed everything." Emma stepped forward, handing a small box to Sophie and Peter. These are tickets to an architecture exhibition where Willem will be presenting one of the projects he's resumed. He wanted you all to be there. Sophie and Peter were delighted, but Lars seemed more interested in Willem's story. How are you now? Do you remember things again? Lars asked, his curiosity sincere. Willem nodded, his eyes filled with emotion. I don't remember everything, but I'm getting better every day. And when I think about what you did for me, I feel like my life is a gift I've been given for a second time. Their conversation flowed naturally, and Willem took the opportunity to show Lars some sketches he had recently worked on. You know, Lars, I've always loved drawing. It's how I imagine making the world better. I think you understand that in your own way, by helping the people around you. The compliment made Lars proud, but he responded with the simplicity of a child. I just didn't want you to be alone anymore. Lars's response left everyone quiet for a moment. Willem smiled, realizing there was much he could learn from the boy who had saved his life. Over time, the two families grew even closer. Willem and Lars developed a special friendship, with Willem frequently visiting to teach the boy how to draw. Peter and Willem began collaborating on sustainable design projects, while Sophie found a confidant and friend in Emma. The culmination of these transformations came during the architecture exhibition. Willem, still a bit nervous, presented one of his older projects, now redesigned with Peter's help to incorporate sustainable features. When he finished, the crowd erupted in applause. Lars, sitting in the front row, beamed as he watched Willem reclaim his spark. He knew his small gesture had played a part in this moment, and the feeling was both overwhelming and indescribable. That evening it was clear that the lives of both families had been irrevocably changed. They were united by an act of kindness that had begun with nothing more than a simple sandwich and a bottle of water. The months following the exhibition marked the start of a new chapter for everyone. The story of Willem and Lars spread throughout the neighborhood, drawing curiosity and admiration. Local newspapers reported how a simple act of kindness had set off a chain of events that transformed lives. People began to see Lars as an inspiration, the boy who reminded everyone that empathy could change the world. Willem, now fully recovered, resumed his work as an architect, but with a newfound purpose. Inspired by his journey, he focused on projects aimed at providing shelter and support for vulnerable individuals like himself. Lars often accompanied him to construction sites, learning how small gestures, like designing a park bench or creating affordable housing, could make a monumental difference in people's lives. The friendship between the two families deepened over time. On weekends, it became a tradition for Willem and Emma to visit Lars's home for dinners or simply to spend time together. Peter and Willem continued collaborating on sustainable projects, while Sophie found in Emma not just a business partner, but a close confidant and friend. One day, as they strolled through the park where it all began, Willem stopped by the sturdy oak tree where Lars had first found him. He gazed at the empty bench, as though seeing a ghost of his former self. "You know, Lars," Willem began, "this place feels special now. It's where you gave me more than a sandwich and water. You gave me hope." Lars smiled, his hands tucked into his pockets. "I think I just did what anyone would do." Willem shook his head gently. "Not everyone would, Lars. That's what makes you special." The ripple effect of Lars's gesture was felt throughout the city. Inspired by the story, many residents began paying closer attention to others, especially those on the margins of society. Initiatives to support people experiencing homelessness sprang up, with volunteers rallying to provide food, shelter, and above all, dignity. At school, Lars was invited to share his story. Sitting before his classmates, he explained with the simplicity of a 10-year-old, "I just thought that if I were in his place, I'd want someone to help me." The room fell silent, and then applause broke out. But what lingered was a quiet reflection among the students. Many left that day vowing to do their part to help those in need. In the end, Lars realized that the impact of his small act of kindness was far greater than he could ever measure. He had learned that kindness was like planting a seed in uncertain soil. unpredictable yet capable of yielding life-changing fruits. As the sun set on the horizon, Lars looked to the sky, wondering what the future might hold. With a smile, he thought of Willem, Emma, and how it all began. Small gestures, he now knew, could indeed change lives, and he promised himself he would always seize the chance to make a difference. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share for more content like this.